So first of all, I'm very, very excited to be here. As was mentioned earlier, I have my current day job is as a civil servant, so I'm seeing this kind of from the community side on a day-to-day basis, and also from inside of government walls. Also, my first real grown-up job was as an office assistant with the Washington State Department of Services for the Blind. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I'm kind of coming home here. I think this is really great. So what I want to talk to you about today are three great things: smart government, open data, and civic hacking. I made an equation of them, but I think it'll be obvious how they all interrelate as we proceed. Can I get a show of hands real quick? Who feels very familiar with the idea of open data, what it means, kind of how it's being practiced? Okay, sweet. I have some basic definitions for everybody else. So quick notes on Code for DC. We'll come back to this kind of at the culmination of the presentation. We're an all-volunteer organization. We're here in DC. We focus on DC issues first, and then kind of in concentric rings out into the region, and national stage second. We've been around for about 2 years. In that time, we've grown very, very quickly. We have about 1,200 volunteers. We do, has anybody been to a hackathon before? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, we'll talk about those too. We do kind of mini hackathons bi-weekly. I actually just had one that ended about midnight last night, with about this number of people in the room right now showing up to volunteer and work on civic coding and data projects. We also do larger events throughout the year, sometimes thematically around public policy or social issues, and sometimes more general. You can find more about us at codefordc.org. We're also on Meetup, which is a great site for you to be familiar with. You can find us there and get a sense of who's participating and what we're working on. And we're also on Twitter. Okay, so what exactly is open data? There are a lot of definitions out there, and first and foremost, I think open data is a discourse. It's a conversation that's happening. But there's a pretty good definition. You can find this on opendefinition.org, appropriately enough. This is a subset of the definition, but I think it's the most important part. Open data is data that anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose, and then some fine print. Three big components of that. You can also explore these more on opendefinition.org. One, if you're releasing data, it should be under an open license. The federal level, this is really easy to solve because it's all public domain. State by state, though, this actually varies. So in some cases, if you're releasing state-level data, it may automatically be open, meaning not subject to copyright or other usage restrictions. But you'd also want to work with your FOIA office, for instance, might know what your local restrictions are. And then if it's not automatically in the public domain, work with the legal team to release it in that fashion, or under the CC0 Creative Commons license is also appropriate. Free of charge, meaning as close as possible to freely access. This is really easy with the internet. Modern infrastructure makes it easy to release huge amounts of data in as close to real time as is reasonable for free. Small amounts of charge are obviously appropriate as well in cases where you're creating the data set for the first time. And then open format. So everybody in this room is familiar with terrible data formats and good data formats. CSV is a really good data format. PDF is a really bad data format. If you're opening data as a PDF, you need to look in the mirror and really think about what you're doing with your life. And then I put this in parentheses because it's my own addition to the schema here, and we'll come back to this as well. It's kind of the what if a tree fell in the forest and nobody was around of open data. If you're opening data and you're not describing it, you're not providing really rich metadata, you're not annotating where the known ugly spots are, where things changed in terms of the collection methodology, et cetera, to allow people to responsibly use it, you're not opening it. And we have data.gov here on the side. I would encourage everybody in this room to take a fresh look at data.gov. A lot's changed on it in the last couple of years, including they're starting to harvest and syndicate state and municipal level data. So it's a really exciting opportunity if you're interested in getting more eyes on your open data offerings. You can work with them to do so. Okay, so we talked a little bit about National Weather Service, NOAA, earlier. So everybody seems familiar with the fact that that exists and that it's an awesome real-time service. You can get access to it. What we have here is an XML file of just a quick query that I put against one of their endpoints of the actual weather data. This will look familiar to anybody who works with data on a day-to-day basis here, or anybody who's ever seen HTML. It's just good basic data. There's some, these are some start and end times here. There's some metadata up here, longitude and latitude. Relatively human readable, but it's not like weather.com, right? One point I want to make here, if you're looking to be a proponent of open data strategies within your agencies, is that open data is not new. It's a new kind of buzzword, or it's something that is getting a lot of press right now. But it's important to remember something like the Weather Service started in 1870 using telegraph lines. So this is probably how most of you actually use weather data on a day-to-day basis. This is a partial screenshot from Wonderground, weatherunderground.com. There's so many great things, and I just want to spend a moment on this. Does anybody here know the history of Weather Underground, the website? Okay, so 1993, I think, early days of the internet. University of Michigan has its own independent weather database. So this is not the NOAA database, this is its own database, its own network of sensors. I'm not sure about the whole collection methodology of history there, but the point is, it's rich, it's there, it's available to researchers. A couple of grad students worked with their professor to develop a Telnet and Gopher-based interface to bring weather data to the internet in real time for the first time. So that was actually the genesis of what would later become this commercial service, which to the chagrin of the entire internet was bought by weather.com a couple years ago. But the genesis of this was like, hey, we have this really awesome academic data set, and we should open it up so that people can use it, and they can build really cool things with it. One of the first applications they made of it was trying to get weather data in real time as an educational tool into K-12 classrooms. Real-time weather data in K-12 classrooms was something that wasn't possible like 2 years before all of this was happening. And then later, there was a commercial enterprise built on top of it, which is the Wonderground.com website that we all know and love. And it's gone on to expand well beyond the sort of the problems that could be described with that original data set to include information from Google, real-time mapping. This is actually some NOAA data right here. So it's actually mashing up data from a number of different commercial, non-commercial providers in ways that no one of those providers could actually create themselves, and in particular from inside of government would never be able to create. So there's this huge origin story to this resource that we can use on a day-to-day basis just to live our lives, which is awesome. So when we talk about, I am new to the world of workforce data, but when you talk about having a weather service moment, this is the type of world that you're trying to enter, right? This is not just about prescribing some sort of specific service that you can put out there and add a pre-known type of value in the public sphere. This is about putting something out there and then watching the crazy, sometimes irresponsible, sometimes completely unexpected things that the public does with it. Can I get a show of hands? Civic hacking. Who knows what civic hacking is? Okay, we've got definitions. So a word on the word hacking. It's good, creative, and nifty. What we're talking about is, when we talk about hacking in this context, we're talking about quick, innovative solutions to long-standing problems. One really good way to think about this is not even as technology. Think about a wobbly table, and somebody says, you know what, forget it, don't bother the maitre d', we're just gonna put a sugar packet under one leg of the table to stop the wobble. That's a hack, okay? What we're not talking about, this is my fatuous definition, we're not talking about stealing folks' identities and tricking their children into installing weird viruses on the home computer using Minecraft plugins. We're not talking about that. That tends to be a hurdle if you're talking particularly with inside of government about civic hacking and why it's a good thing. People think that you're trying to invite people who have affiliations with the Estonian mob to break everything and then force you to rebuild it. So what's civic hacking? I have two definitions here. I'll just focus on the one in yellow because it's my favorite. Civic hacking is people working together quickly and creatively to make their cities better for everyone. Again, notice that technology and data are not words that are in that definition. There is a more sort of technology and data-centric definition above that, but fundamentally this is about people who are trying to do the equivalent of that sugar packet for problems or opportunities that they see in their local lived spaces. Another way to look at this is my obligatory infographic for the deck. If we have the boring, staid, responsible gray blob of government over here, the grid on the right is meant to be a non-exhaustive enumeration of the different types of people, perspectives, experiences that come together to comprise this thing, this messy, amazing thing that we call civic hacking. I'll read a few of them. Organizers, meaning community organizers and activists. Hashtag SOCINT, if you guys have bumped into that, social entrepreneurs. Journalists, coders, designers, user experience designers, data scientists, social workers. And that N originally was government on this slide, actually. We have a lot of civil servants actually showing up directly in their official capacity or in their non-official capacity, like me today, to actually participate as members of this community in a way that augments what they're doing during their day job. This is also happening everywhere. So I started by talking about Code for DC, and DC tends to be, people tend to think of DC as the exception to every rule. We're actually just a city, right, with the federal government sort of squat in the middle of us. This is a very, very out-of-date map for one of the international organizations of civic hackers. So it's out of date and it's non-exhaustive in the sense that it's only one organization's network. Each one of those gray circles on there, I know on the back it's sort of hard to see, is an organization, many of them the same size as mine, some smaller, some bigger, all over the world. I think almost every state at this point, just for, this is Code for America's network, but I guarantee you if you're in a city of more than a couple thousand people, there are people who identify as civic hackers or do things that they think of as civic hacking that you can find and connect with. The argument I want to make today is that you should, as civil servants, you should think of civic hacking as a force extender for the best parts of what you do. Again, this is non-exhaustive, but some things that civic hacking can bring to you. Imagine going to a Code for DC meetup, or if you're in Seattle, a Code for Seattle meetup, talking with people. You can get fresh perspectives. You think of all of those different perspectives. Some of those are the ones that are the hardest to encounter directly inside of government. Government's not traditionally very good at hiring user experience designers, for instance. If you want to meet some top flight professionals who can just look at a thing for 2 seconds and tell you what's wrong with it from a usability perspective, civic hacking is where you need to be. If you're trying to reach the citizenry through information intermediaries like journalists, there are journalists hanging out at the civic hackers who can just talk with you in a very off-the-record, very strategic way about how to reach people and tell stories with your data and increase the impact. Data quality improvements. So in DC, we have a data set called the Master Address Repository. It's a local geolocation service that just works for the city. We started working with the geo team from city government, playing with the data, and actually one of the first things that came out of it wasn't a complete application. It was, we found some things wrong with the data. And that was actually really good. It wasn't embarrassing. There wasn't any face saving that needed to happen for the city government. They just said, that's awesome. And then they went and patched their data, and then now it's more accurate and more usable for everybody. Visibility. So there was talk about impact and about storytelling. There's no better argument for keeping or increasing your budget than saying we have people who are voters who are excited about our data and use it and talk with us about it all the time, let alone the storytelling aspect. And then last and not least, working in government is hard. It can be a slog. It's gray. It's staid. Going and talking with people about what you do and why it matters and having them tell you that they agree that it does matter and that it's amazing is a huge way to increase the energy that you bring to what you do and just keep that morale up. So over here on the right, this is sort of goes with our data.gov graphic from earlier. This is a website that I maintain, or my group maintains, called opendatadc.org, not to be confused with opendata.dc.gov. This is what's called a CCAN instance. If anybody's bumped into CCAN, it's an open source data platform. It's actually the same software that data.gov runs. I set this up over a 6-pack on a Sunday. And what we use it for is to complement the city's open data offerings. So if somebody wants to, say, mash up, I don't know, labor data with food stamp data and tell a story against it, they can create an account here, download the canonical data sets from the city, play with it to their heart's content, republish it here. It'll automatically create an API, and then they can do a data visualization on top of it. This is the power of the technology that's there out of the box. Literally all I did to configure this, other than like set up a SSH on it, was add our logo and the Lund font map, which you can see over on the right. So this is happening everywhere. There are tons of these data platforms being set up, particularly in the larger cities, and this is sort of the sophistication of the type of practice that I'm talking about. That's happening for free, right? So it's a force extender. So I want to talk about just really quickly a few projects that we're doing, just to give you an idea also of sort of the breadth of the issues that we're working with and partners. First and foremost, DC Campaign Finance Watch. So our Office of Campaign Finance publishes information about people who are running for office. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, sometimes people meet their obligations to provide transparency into how their campaigns are financed. Sometimes they don't do such a good job of it. But this team, which I'm not a part of, is building easy to use like sort tables and things like that on top of that data so that people can use that to make decisions about who they want to reelect and who they don't. District housing. This is a really exciting one. It's a little bit more of a stretch, I think, for what you guys do, but it's something you can just think about. Our district housing team, they're working actually with a non-government partner, Bread for the City, which is a large social service provider here in the city. It turns out if you're applying for affordable housing in the district, each one of those units is the application process is private, it's non-centralized, each one of those has a paper form with many similar data points on it, but they're not the same. So if you're somebody who's under duress for housing, you're trying to connect with housing, you end up having to fill out like 100 different really, really terrible forms with tons of private information and hand it over to third parties. So what the district housing team has done is they've built a consolidated form with basically point and shoot filtering about which housing units you want to apply to, what's relevant to you, if you're looking for family housing, et cetera. And then we're going to make this available to social workers when they sit with their clients. The open data portion of this is that we're actually going to be able to then harvest information about how people are connecting with housing and their outcomes, and then publish that back to the city to help inform public policy. So it's actually generating rather than just consuming open data. A couple more just very quickly. WMU is our local NPR affiliate. We actually created their election map this year, and we were beating them using reporters that we had at poll stations. We're actually beating the Board of Elections to publishing results for the most important elections that were happening, which were for the mayor, the attorney general, and our cannabis initiative. And last but not least, this one's really cool, and it's something that I think you guys could actually templatize if you're working with folks. A lot of times, information that's the highest value and that people would have the best perspectives on is also sensitive, right? It's private, particularly at the record level. A lot of times has private information in there, even if it's not literally social security numbers. It can be things that can expose you to Mosaic, et cetera. This map, it's an extract from a map that we created using information furnished to us by the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, which we somehow have in DC despite not being a state, showing where students are living versus where they're going to school. And if you look at the whole map, it tells a story that you might expect, which is that poor kids are getting bused all over the city, rich kids are staying put. The really cool part about this is that OSSI actually created, based on the vectors that we were most interested in, a statistically equivalent data set that kept the fidelity of the data, but didn't pose the privacy ramifications that the original data set would have been. So that's a deep partnership that resulted in being able to open data for a specific application to directly inform public policy discourse. Okay, so rounding out. Open data and civic hacking together are providing a platform that really enables new modes of collaboration between government and the public. When we talk about open government, this is not about pushing data out and creating transparency and sunshine laws, which are all very important. What we're talking about is making that brick wall that's between the inside of government and outside not matter and be almost academic. Things that you guys should all do as soon as you get home. 3. 1, open your data. If you're not opening it actively all the time right now, you should be. If you want to know if you are or not, go to Google, type in file format, JSON or CSV, and cite whatever the URL for your agency is. You'll be surprised what is up there and what isn't. There are people who can help you in your agency or the state or municipal level to open your data up. 2, befriend the hackers. They exist, they're wonderful, they have sugar packets, they can solve all of your problems. The way you do this is go to meetup.com and type in the name of your city or your state and type in hacking or civic hacking or open data, I guarantee you there's a meetup. Just go to the next one. They'll be really excited to see you. And last but not least, think about hosting an event. The White House is doing this. NASA's doing this. NOAA's doing this. HUD, I think, is doing it. You can host what's called a data jam or a hackathon. And the idea is you convene people who have lots of different perspectives, all the people in those different colored boxes it's talking about, bring them into a room, feed them some pizza if that's something you can get away with, and give them some Post-it notes and some bandwidth, and you'll be amazing what pops out. That is it. Thank you. I'm really excited to talk.